Actually, how many of the people here are members of the party? Okay. Right, so still a couple more to join up.
Come on. Anyone got fun? Only takes a couple of minutes.
Out of the 501,000 first preference votes, that's only one part of the story because there are preferences, okay? To give you an example, in New South Wales, Michael Balderstone, who was the lead candidate, had about 145,000 votes to start and ended up, by the time he got knocked out, right at the end of the count, it got up to 265,000 votes. And he was the last candidate to be knocked out before the last seat in New South Wales was determined between One Nation and the Nats. That close. Yeah. So it's sensational. What we don't see, of course, are the votes that we could have got, 2 or 3 or 5, that actually got tied up with one of the majors. So people that voted one ALP and then maybe 2 legalised cannabis. The point is that we never see that, and the AEC doesn't, we don't get that data. So I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibilities that cannabis would have got 1 million people putting a number against the party. If not more, maybe. So I think, look, we'll just open up the panel discussion. I mean, compared to the previous federal election, that was about double the count. So can I just ask everybody's opinion, maybe starting with Bernie, and what is it that all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but we've seen this growth in the vote where people are willing to actually vote for a party with cannabis in its name?
Yeah, well, thank you. I spoke to a lot of general practitioners who are prescribing medicinal cannabis now before the election, and there were some 130,000 registered users of medicinal cannabis in Queensland alone. So I don't know how many of them voted one for our party, but you'd assume a fair chunk of the medicinal users were on board. Some cynical journalists said that something to do with how we were placed on the ballot might have had something to do with it, which I of course don't agree with, but they were a bit cynical about our row C random ballot, and of course I don't think it hurt that our logo was on the ballot paper either, which was just a great idea, whoever managed to get that done. But there was still a lot of sentiment in the community that this is no longer a fringe issue. I even managed to convince my rusted-on LNP parents to vote for the party after they understood what we stood for.
But his son is a candidate, you'd hope.
Well, you'd hope so. You'd hope so. But so as for the numbers, I think we had first preference votes of about 161,000 in Queensland, and we were the last party exhausted. So we were 5th out of all the, I think there were 25 odd parties running candidates in Queensland, and so we were the last party to exhaust the votes. So our preferences were really important, and at the end of the day it took about 3 or 4 weeks to count Queensland's votes because of the preferences became so important at the end that it was ultimately a race between, I don't know if anyone here knows Amanda Stoker, but she was looking at the 3rd LNP seat, and Pauline. And the breakdown of our preference voting was about 40% to Labor, 40% to Pauline Hanson, only about 10% of the Greens, which was a bit surprising, and the LNP vote really was negligible in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th preferences. So preferences were really important, and I don't know what people did around the country with their how to vote cards. I know that we didn't hand out too many because we didn't have terribly many volunteers. We had a hardcore group of volunteers who did very well where they were campaigning, but we just left our preferences completely open. It was choose your own adventure for 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th, etc. So we left it up to the voter to decide where the preferences went, and that's where they fell. So there was a very pleasing result with the resources we had to hand. I think we ended up spending $3,600 after the registration fee, and that was the dedicated team. I've got to put in a thank you to my friend Frank, and Fabrice and all of the state party who really chipped in, and Suzette can't be here today, and Ingrid, there's a very horrible medical issue happening with Ingrid's son, so they couldn't be here, but they asked me to pass on their thanks to everybody too, and to the party. It was just a dedicated, hardcore, small group. One of the group actually put together, hired a trailer from a service station, Frank's trailer, and plastered it with call flutes and drove 5,000 kilometres around Queensland, and that was about the extent of the campaigning. So next time, it's going to be hopefully a better funded campaign, and the way we went, I think really opened up the eyes of particularly our state government, and they only last week announced a review into our random roadside drug testing policies. So the state government in Queensland, in George Street we call it, which is where all the politicians live, have announced a review, and it has to have something to do with the result that we achieved in the federal election. So yeah, so yeah.
I wanted to ask, is the Queensland Party making a submission to that review, and are you opening a forum regarding the formulation of the submission?
Whether we're invited to make a submission to them or not, we're going to make one.
Yeah,
I would like to personally be involved, but I'm waiting for an invitation, but if I don't get one, I'll be having something to say about it.
Having been through dozens of these things, I don't think you're going to get the invitation. But certainly
exactly. But and I don't know what's going to take 15 months is a bit odd too. But we will certainly be putting in submission.
But when I noted that, I thought to myself, this provides a great forum for the Queensland arm of the party to then undertake a review in the public light regarding these matters prior to submission, to actually generate a substantive report which provides on-the-ground data of the application of these laws as an oppression, not as law policing.
Yeah, and the other thing is, as a result of the result in Queensland, there is a lot of media interest around what's happening moving forward in the party, both state and federally. So we've made a lot of connections with the right journalists to, and even as recently as last week, there have been articles written about our role, or the party's role, in perhaps persuading the state politicians to look into reviewing those draconian laws. So we'll keep the pressure on them for sure.
And considering the nature of the press in Queensland, it's amazing the coverage you've got.
All right, Jim.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Bernie. Now that the President is here, sorry, and
I apologise for being so late.
Michael Balderstone, the President of the Legalise Cannabis Party. Well,
yeah, but not the brains.
And good timing, Michael, because this question is aimed at you. So, we're just talking about the federal election, and fantastic result up in Queensland. But we got a huge amount of media, a massive amount of media. This is another really important reason why for the existence of the Legalise Cannabis Party. Now, I mean, with the media, I mean, what did you find? How did the journos treat you, Michael? Has there been a paradigm shift in the way the media is reporting on cannabis now? I mean, what's your general takeaway?
Okay, so I've done lots of media for years, and most media are sympathetic to our cause, I find. They're creative people, they're into it, no argument with them. News Limited is a bit different. So we did a story with local Northern Star, Bernie knows about it, a few weeks ago to promote Mardi Gras. We focused on RDT. They sent it to the editors in Sydney and completely changed the story. We want people to drive stoned, was basically their leader. Under the influence. We support them. Yeah, you saw it. So generally the media is sympathetic. The stigma has changed, I reckon. Possibly they've smoked weed, most of those photographers, filmmakers, writers. Who disagrees it's a health issue?
So
it's a health issue.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
No, it's a civil liberty.
So we went close.
Also, I would agree. What do you guys think?
Yep.
So we went close to winning a seat in Queensland. In WA.
Bernie gave Pauline a sleepless night.
I think a couple.
Yeah.
But in WA we actually won 2 seats. Now it's been 18 months now. Brian and Sophia. Maybe you can let us know what it's like to, steep learning curve. What's it like to be, well, in actual fact, Sophia, you're the first one that we knew for sure had been elected. So, strictly speaking, you're the first legalised cannabis MP in the country. So,
Ever?
Yeah. Okay.
How cool is that? I obviously want that on my gravestone when I pass away, because that is definitely the highlight of my life. Yeah, I hope I haven't peaked. Too early. Too early, yes, that's right. So, what I find is that our presence, both Brian and myself, has totally legitimised our cause on a political level, and not that other people's work hasn't, by the way, but it's really ensured that we are in the mainstream. We have been on TV, radio, even the front of the West Australian newspaper, which they had a lovely cover with Reefer Madness on there. It was loud, it was a little bit outdated, but it certainly made us get noticed. So one of those things about all publicity is good publicity. We make sure we talk about cannabis a lot in the upper house in Parliament, so when you go back through the records, you can see that we are focusing on cannabis simply by the amount of times that we have mentioned in there. And that makes it normal for people to hear that when they look up, not that many people probably follow the live stream that automatically happens in the upper house, but just in case they do, they will notice that. And certainly when we speak to any sort of news agency, that is one of the big subjects, and it gets written in. And once again, cannabis, the term cannabis is becoming so very normalised, and that in itself takes away the stigma. Oh, that was really my blood.
Any insights into becoming an MP, and how's it going?
Well, it's life-changing. Basically what she said, but we're in a position now where not only is it legitimised, it's actually in the highest house in the state. We can speak freely about cannabis in all its glory. It's not just about the word cannabis, but also the context, how it's important for your wellness, how it's important for your mental and physical wellness, how people's lives have suffered because they've been deprived of this, how we can compare the use of cannabis with the use of alcohol, how we can compare, and as the representatives of the people, we can actually stand up for cannabis being used in a sensible, valuable way that enhances people's lives. And because we do that in the highest house in the state, people sit up and take notice. And so I think this is a very valuable thing. It also gave us the start of an ability to stand for the whole of Australia, because we're coming up for more elections, and what we're basically saying is, we've done it, so can you. You will. You're next. It's coming up. There's a wave starting, and being part of that wave and moving forward with that wave is exceptionally exciting, but also to know that we can actually travel to Victoria, New South Wales and say, here we are, follow us. I'm surprised actually we came after you lot. Sorry? We came before you lot. Normally we come after New South Wales and Victoria, but now WA is first. And so we can help lead that journey, lead that charge, if you like, to freeing the weed for the whole of Australia. And from my point of view, what's done for me is just made me feel so humble and so privileged, and it's just awe-inspiring, and also just feels quite right. The time is right, it's now.
And Brian, you're the chair of the inquiry looking into cannabis in WA?
Yes, I'm the chair.
Really help us get into that.
Well, I'm the chair of the Select Committee into Cannabis and Hemp, and they gave us a majority of government members, Labour members, who were actually quite opposed to cannabis. They thought, oh, it's all a drug. You ought to see them now. They've transformed. They might not be able to say, yes, we support this, because their leader says we shouldn't do this, but they are now fully on board with the idea that cannabis is good. It's not an evil drug. It's not going to kill you. On the contrary, it's important to keep people alive and healthy and happy. And they've had a 180-degree transformation how they see cannabis. Now they see cannabis very differently to what the people outside the committee see. They are actually supporters. And so we're travelling actually, we've done tours in WA, we're now travelling to Europe and Israel in November to get the final part of the picture before we write our report. Now I can't speak about what the report's going to say, but I am of the opinion that a report is going to come out which will support changes, improvements. Indeed, the driving with THC is going to be a major focus, I trust and I hope. And so will the government change as the result of that? No, it won't. I think it'll be still very, not science, and need more time. But it's another brick in the building. It's another step forward, it's another proof, it's another assistance, like Fiona Patton's report from a year or two back, not last year it was, in Victoria. It's another brick. We'll be adding that to our report, and more and more and more. So finally people can't say, you didn't know, there wasn't enough information, you got plenty of information, get off your backside and do something. So it's going to be an important step in freeing cannabis.
Andrew, you actually took one for the team at the federal election and ran in probably the hardest jurisdiction of all and travelled all the way down to the ACT. How did you enjoy that?
I'd lived in the ACT for 5 years. I mean, it's good to leave, so I could leave twice, that's okay. Listen, the points come out, why have we done well, and some clowns blaming the fact that we're on row C or something like that. It's more like an idea whose time has come. What I'm trying to do in terms of thought seeds is plant a big picture, right? I mean, it's good that we're against roadside saliva testing, all the other nonsense, but I say to people, what if we stop the prohibition altogether? Right, there's something like $2 billion a year spent on that, and remember I started the activism in 1988 for industrial hemp rather than medical, even though I was aware of some of the medical effects then, because I thought, and I still think, the widespread industrial uses for the creation of hempcrete housing, non-polyester clothing, the paper, the non-wood paper, those things in terms of healing the country, right? I mean, people aren't aware we're in tragic financial state under the auspices of the government we're currently running. We're almost slaves to foreign ownership. 80% of our fuel comes from one refinery in Singapore. We're flying vegetables in from Southeast Asia because we want to put McMansions in on the old Chinese vegetable farms. We're in a very vulnerable position. I mean, I'm selling the idea that hemp can change the world in an ordered manner, starting with, what if we didn't have a prohibition? The windfall is then spent on infrastructure. What's holding up the hemp industries is the infrastructure. We simply don't have the processing mills, so that people aren't doing it. What we want as a first stage with this, our share of the $2 billion, is to start buying hemp fibre. You set up a grading system. This is the way I saw it done in France. A grading system, and the government then buys from a fund hemp fibre, so farmers are encouraged to grow it. And in 3 years you'll have enough stockpile to justify running a $150 million mill. Right? You can kickstart the industry that way. The trouble is, the sort of infrastructure that's now needed for advanced paper making and textiles is a bit beyond just like passing the hat around at a Mardi Gras. Right? We do need some sort of government assistance. But what we want as a political party, I mean, our dreams aren't directly translatable into reality, but our dreams have to inspire the masses, so even the rusted on liberal fuckwits say, oh yeah, maybe there's something to all this, because it's something for everyone is what I'm saying. You've got the soil benefits, you've got the forestry issues, you've got the microplastics issue, you've got the nutritional issues, you've got the medical issues, right? You've got the CO2 targets, you've got the carbon sequestration, right? It's all of the issues, because my thesis has always been the prohibition of cannabis was the first big shot against the natural world. Right, take out their leading champion, see where you go. So we can undo it, and I do as time has come. I really think if we make a big enough effort, we'll get a senator in New South Wales, and it's important to have senators anywhere just to get around the censorship. Right? Has anyone noticed how the censorship is getting tighter and more pervasive, at least in Parliament, you know, you can be allowed now without someone kicking your door in and dragging out your computers and things like that.
Well, we've got a couple more years before the federal election. The next one up, yeah,
the state.
Well, the state's the next one. Yeah. So Victoria's the next cab off the rank. We still aren't registered down there. We're managing the process. We're about that close. We actually had to put a supplementary list of members in, and we've got about 3 weeks now. We just received an email from the Victoria Electoral Commission to say that we've got 3 weeks to get enough members to get across the line and get registration. And one of I mean, it's so important that we get registration down there and that we're able to contest Victoria because, excuse me, unlike West Australia where McGowan has control of both houses, in Victoria, Andrews is likely to get back, maybe in a minority government, governing with the Greens, but the balance of the upper house is just going to be, could be very, very fine. Could be very fine. At the moment, it's very finely balanced, and it could easily go the other way. So it's so important that we get the party registered down there, and of course, given that Victoria has the same system of group voting tickets that West Australia did, although it's abolished now, we've got a very good chance of getting an MP or two elected down there. So.
I just have 2 minutes to tell of a recent development in my life that's not directly related to legalise cannabis.
It's got to do with Victorian election?
It's got to do with police, right? I just want to see what people from other states have got to say, right? For 20 years or so, I've held a firearms licence. When I had the big medical bust in 17, that was cancelled. I applied for it to be reissued last year, and after a lengthy delay, it was refused. So I took them to New South Wales Civil Administrative Tribunal. And then, this is where it gets really interesting, then the Police Commissioner made an application to have a secret hearing where they present evidence about me that they don't want me to know that I know they've got or how they've got it. So they want to run my application, my appeal against their decision, without me being there. And when I expressed surprise and then astonishment, they said, oh no, we do that all the time. It's called Section 58 of our Act. Have you had any experience with that degree of star chamber? Is anyone else surprised, astounded? Right? I'll just say it again. I asked for a review of a tribunal hearing and the cops say, yeah, we want that to happen, but we don't want him there. Huh? That's my current reality.
You scare them too much, Andrew.
Yeah, you got us worried now. So Mike, with the election result, federal election result, and Queensland getting over 4%, the federal party's going to end up with a bit of a cash cow. Yeah, what are the plans for the money and then what? Andrew's already spent it.
We haven't got the money yet.
No. But when it comes in, I mean, what's the thoughts on what we'll do?
I reckon we'll have to ask Bernie how we should spend it for a start. He got most of it in. I think I should take this chance to actually thank Bernie, because he, it's been a bunch of stoner hippies generally, excuse me, Doc, who generally run as candidates, and Bernie, a lawyer at Noosa, working his ass off for people in court cases, was quite a change, and the result was a big part of that, and we're really grateful. As are we really grateful to you two in Western Australia. You mightn't have even known you were going to get elected, suddenly your life's changed. As am I totally grateful for Craig at the end, because it's his clever number crunching that made it happen. It's not luck, that is total bullshit.
Listen, Michael, in my defence, I'll say my wife calls me an undercover hippie.
You are, it's true. I've got a question. So the hardest question for me that comes up, and I'm wondering how you guys go in Parliament, is that we're a single issue party. And that is quite, I'm not suggesting we change it in the slightest, but it's quite a big issue. I'm interested in how everyone handles that.
Good question.
Well, one issue, and this came up only last week in Queensland at least, the Law Society conducted a very in-depth research into the cost of Prohibition in Queensland, and it came out at $250 million just to prosecute and police cannabis possession in Queensland, and another 230 million to investigate and prosecute suppliers of cannabis. So you've got $500 million being spent by the Queensland government that could be spent on schools or on education. So I think if someone comes up to me and says, well, you know, your party's just about marijuana, no, it's not. It's about saving taxpayers' money by decriminalising, and Prohibition just hasn't worked anywhere in the world for alcohol or drugs. It just does not work, and it's just a simple, big, fat waste of money prosecuting people for low-level possession of cannabis, particularly, and it's a cost saving to the community. And if it was decriminalised or legalised and taxed, well, there's money coming back into the government coffers. So if anyone's out there thinking that this is a one-issue party, it is a one-issue, but a party, so to speak, but it has far-reaching economic benefit to review the laws. And then you've got the roadside drug testing.
It's beneficial in every aspect.
Yeah, and the roadside drug testing is another issue, and we're seeking review of that. And I said earlier that the Queensland government are looking at reviewing it. But the social and economic cost of taking people off the roads for having a presence of THC in your saliva, you're not under the influence. And in Queensland, it's a mandatory 1 month disqualification. In New South Wales, it's 3. And some people are lucky enough to be eligible for a work licence. But it's not just about work, it's about someone who is taking medicinal cannabis. And if they're off the roads, they can't go to their doctors, and they're usually taking medicinal cannabis because they've got medical issues. They can't get to their doctors, they can't visit their elderly parents in homes or in hospital, they can't take their kids to school. There's a social and economic cost to this draconian roadside drug testing law. I just don't know what the point of it is in the first place. I mean, can anyone tell me? A deterrent of money, yeah, fines. But the deterrent factor is to be found in driving under the influence of the drug. It is still a serious offence. No one's calling for that to be abandoned, that law. But the media are conflating those two issues, and they're reporting it as that we are looking to try and change the law to have people driving under the influence of cannabis legally. That's not the case. So anyone reporting on this, we are not asking for that. We're just seeking a review of the roadside random drug testing, drug present in saliva legislation that just is no good for anybody.
I think we need to
Sophia?
Sorry?
I was going to say we should be highlighting those really crappy statistics that say 1 in 3 drug-affected drivers are dangerous. In actual fact,
I was going to say that the 2 out of 3 drivers that aren't drug affected that are having car accidents, we need to be addressing that problem. You know, we've got 1/3 of our drivers are drug affected causing accidents. 1 in 3. 2 out of 3 aren't drug affected. They're normal, hard-working, capable, but they're shit drivers.
Yeah. So Sophia, as an MP, did you get the one-issue party?
Yes, obviously that has come up. What is good about our stance, I guess, is that we are there for humanitarian reasons. Okay, it is anti-humanity to legislate against cannabis. Basically, we all want to feel better. We all want to be healthy. We all want to have access to medications that can help us achieve those goals. So as a result of that, we have, and we've been given a lot of freedom by our local WA party as well. We can talk about other humanitarian issues, in particular housing, for instance. We are having a massive housing crisis, and we talk about hempcrete, we talk about hemp housing around that. We talk about how a state as rich as ours, we have $5.6 billion, right, in our state budget that should be used for all sorts of things that could easily be used to improve housing, to improve healthcare. Yet that's not really coming through. But because of our stance, we can address all of those things, even though they are not necessarily specifically related to cannabis, but they come from the same mindset of trying to create more humane laws and happier, healthier people. So that's how I sort of deal with that, and I imagine, yeah, Brian's got similar take.
I think it's certainly true that there is one issue front and centre, and that is cannabis legalisation. That's absolutely true. But pretty much everything else is cannabis adjacent. So if we have questions, well, let's take cannabis as a health issue. Now, health issues health is a question about physical health, mental health, financial health, and social health, which means that everything in politics is actually fair game. Now, we've been given permission by our executive that we can address anything from the perspective of an individual who has been elected to represent the people of South, West, or East Metropolitan. So anything which affects my electorate, I need to take an interest in, because I represent them. But cannabis is front and centre. Let's take, for example, cannabis as a question of social justice. If you're going to take someone's licence off for having the presence of cannabis, which isn't impairing at all, is that just? Where else are we having unjust laws applied? What about the working mother who is trying very hard to look after her children and is being beaten by her partner, and she defends herself, and then she gets done by the police for defending herself? Where's the justice? If we're going to just focus on cannabis and not speak about anything else, we're doing a disservice to the population we represent. So we can never say it's as a single issue party. We care for the people. Cannabis is actually the front and centre, but we care for the people.
Yeah, that's nice, because firstly we need slogans too. I mean, I was trying to float different slogans, like, oh, we may be a small party, we've got a big idea. And in terms of like one issue, then you go through the different groups in the population that'll benefit. So firstly, the farmers, they'll benefit from less chemical use, they'll benefit from better fertility from their soil and things like that. The secondary processors, the contractors, it'll return some wealth to local industries. Then the processors and the people of advanced technology for textiles and things like that. You're creating large-scale, long-term quality employment rather than transient jobs. That's even before we get into the medical and the recreational, right? Also, the psychopaths, which I think is the only reasonable way to refer to those that oppose us, because they're operating in an irrational manner. What's that?
Psychopath party.
No, they're the rest of the world. The rest of the world. What I try and float the idea of a transformational change from a hydrocarbon world back to a carbohydrate world, right? Everything that we can currently get from hydrocarbon plastics and extractives, we can get from plant-based material, and generally better, right? And there isn't a strategy that I can think of, and I challenge people to provide. I said, if you have a better idea than converting a lot of waste farmland to hemp farming and rejuvenating the soil and rejuvenating the economical sort of health of the local area and then the population at large, if you've got a better idea than that, tell me and I'll join your party, right? I mean, I actually strongly and rationally believe that large scale, and that large scale cannabis application will be a better society, and that includes more relaxed recreational cannabis, less anxiety, better sexual relations, better all sorts of things, if it's not a drama and the quality of the herb is there, normalised. Okay, so it's certainly multi-issue.
Just addressing Michael's point of it being a single issue party. It's a beautiful thing for the media to take that thing, because you immediately correct them. You obviously don't understand the issue. Yes, we are a single plant party, but basically you name any issue in society right now and I could tie cannabis legalisation to it in some way. Be it industrialisation, legalisation, health and safety, everything. So anyone who says it's a single issue party doesn't understand the issue that is being discussed.
There's hardly an area of life it doesn't affect. Everyone got 3 locks on their doors. I personally think all the wild savage dogs we've got came from people growing pea plants in their backyard.
And that's to my mind, is the best way to play it, is to immediately correct them on not understanding the issue. Because suddenly they're on the back foot going, oh, but hang on, you just want to legalise pot. It's like, no, we want to grow housing, we want to provide food, medicine, industry, you know. Suddenly you have destroyed their whole argument.
Personally, I love it. Because they ask you, you know, what's your policy on refugees and, you know, all that stuff. And really, we can cut through. We've got to focus on our one thing. In some ways, it makes it quite easy.
Yeah.
I have a question.
It's still all humanitarian that you're talking about, you know, so yeah. I just want to, one WA specific thing that we have is that WA runs on the mining industry, alright? We have an incredible amount of mining of different substances, we've got gas, oil, lithium is very popular as well, and that industry is incredibly destructive to our environment. So we don't have any other real industries happening, but hemp and cannabis could absolutely take over that role as major income for our state while we are trying to heal the soil from the various mining companies that have destroyed it. So the economic aspect to what we're talking about can have major benefits for the WA economy and change its focus and be more environmentally friendly.
Just further on hemp, I work out west near Mooney Crossing, all the heavy cotton growing areas around places like that. All of these people are heavily conservative, religious, National Party voters. Every single one that I speak to, and all of these people are multi-millionaires with a minimum 10,000 plus acres, and you can imagine how much that costs to run. Every one of these cotton growers out west is asked, when I work out there, is asking when can we grow hemp. Yes.
Yeah, you brought that up. I didn't mention that. I'm also president of the Industrial Hemp Association. We've been agitating for this for some time. Happy to say it's starting this year. The Cotton group with the CRC out at Narrabri are going to look. We pushed this 20 years ago to try and, like, cotton is a very chemical intensive crop. It was not only water, the chemicals because of the boll weevil. Right, and we did experiments some time ago with co-culturing the cannabis and the cotton to break up the boll weevil. It looked quite encouraging. They're finally doing it again, right? And you know, we like to think it will overgrow the cotton movement just by its own technical agronomic superiority, right? Do you want to hear some great stories? I mean, another time, but yeah, no, hemp is good. And once it gets a go, remember, Dr. Johnson in 1860 put experimental hemp crops up in the Hunter, and his little patch became 600 acres. You know, and just, yeah, that's what we want, overgrow the government. Yeah.
People I know, there's more than 100,000 acres tied up in this people, and they are bringing constantly, when can we start doing this stuff? When can we start doing it? They're all ultra-conservatives. Some of them even voted for Bernie in the Senate because they can do the other thing and still work.
We had support from cotton farmers back in the 90s. Yeah, that's not the problem. We're getting there. Getting there. Yeah. But now, hang on. Now the agronomic trials have been done. You've got to do varietal trials. You've got to do selections. It's on its way, right? So even if we enter an economic catastrophe, which is highly likely in the next few years because of international pressures and the collapse of the American dollar and stuff like that, which is imminent as far as I can see. The real concern that I have, and I wonder what other people think, is they're talking about programmable credit cards, and there's talk of tenders between IT companies, the banks and the government.
Maybe that's got a bit off...
It's a bit off topic, but it's something that, I mean, the purpose is not to legalise cannabis. The purpose is to save the future, right? Save the future. And there's lots of ways of them truncating our hopes and plans, so there's nothing off topic when it comes to cannabis. Yeah, we're aiming to leave this planet in a better place than we found it, right? And we better hurry up.
Yeah, I hear you. Actually, talking about the future, we actually have a by-election today in West Australia. One of the interesting things, and I mean, Bernie was talking about drawing left in Queensland. we went fantastically well in the regions, all over the country, fantastically well. I mean, those dozen seats or so between Brisbane and the north, I mean, you were getting 9%, fantastic. Up in Durack, which is a seat in West Australia, an enormous vote. So you'd be campaigning up at, is it Carnarvon? Is that how you pronounce it? Carnarvon. Right, sorry, Carnarvon, sorry. Right, so do you want to tell us about the by-election?
Yes, we've got an excellent candidate, Leanne Lockyer. She's an Indigenous lady of some great renown. She's actually inherited the title of a medicine man or healer from her grandfather at an early age, and she exudes a power. So when she talks to the First Nations people in the area of the electorate, the North West Central, she has an immediate connection which is really, really powerful. Now, she's looking very much at everything we said here about the power of cannabis, but in Indigenous context here about helping people to reawaken from 200 years of oppression and to recovering the beauties which could then help us to move forward, imbibing the knowledge of an ancient people to recover the land, to recover our spirituality, to recover all that is good and how we relate one to the other. So that's one start there we could look at in North West Central, quite beyond, if you like, the concept of here just putting cannabis out there. So it's a very encouraging start, continuation of the start in getting the legalised cannabis parties throughout our nation to move forward. It's this tsunami of people saying, we want something new. And I reckon today's by-election, let's see what happens. We're very interested in the outcome, of course. Will we make any impact? I'm sure we'll make some impact. There's a lot of things I could bore you for hours with talking about that. But it's another step. We'll see where it goes, but we now have on board the first of, I hope, of many First Nations people who will take this topic and move it forward with a spirit of which I think we can just be proud and look forward to seeing how that develops in our nation.
Any questions from the audience?
Their motto, one mob, us mob, is absolutely brilliant. It not only encompasses our First Nations people, we all should embrace that. One mob, it's just us. Make a team, we'll never be good.
How about we open up now for questions from the floor? Jim?
Yeah, it's particularly related to have any of the groups got plans to we were talking earlier on, there really is a need in Australia for either a foundation, academic foundation dedicated to the study and dissemination of academic materials relating to cannabis, commissioning studies on cannabis, symposia on cannabis and the like, both at the medicinal end but most particularly in law. And there does seem to be a need in Australia to put together a number of study groups toward generating the model legislation that you guys require to be prosecuting the case on behalf of the public. Now, I believe that the cannabis law reform movement around Australia has become mature enough at this stage to be considering putting together a group of academics looking toward predominantly consolidating all of the academic work on cannabis around the world and bringing it in.
Listen, that's been done and done to death. The Lambert, forget it. I mean, what we want, we don't know. Hang on, no.
Let Jim finish.
Right, and they also developing Australia-specific model legislation based on the Australian conditions. Because there are a great many legal practitioners in Australia who have an interest in this. I tutor in constitutional law, for example, and I'm particularly interested in the situating of model legislation, right, at the state level with corollary legislation at the federal level. These are matters that need concourse amongst like legal minds, and I just wanted to ask, has there been any moves in the state parties to consider this matter? The generation of an actual federal institution which is devoted to exploring legalisation, analysing legalisation and providing you guys with guidance and model legislation?
No, they haven't. No. I mean, with New South Wales, we've literally only just got registered.
We're still
in the
fighting
process.
saliva testing and other sort of more critical issues. Right, look, one thing about academics, I mean, the Lambert Foundation years ago got $34 million to research, to spend, given fairly by Mr. Lambert, for researching epilepsy because his granddaughter was epileptic. They have pissed around with, they have put rats in water cages, right? They have squandered effort. Academics, when have they produced anything of value? There is already data banks which are really useful. The International Association of Cannabis for Medicine, that's a conglomerate.
Well, they managed to write a few constitutions for parties.
Can we just frame the? Can we just sort of focus on framing the conversation here? I think what Jim's asking is, you know, talking about the model going forward of legalisation, not necessarily what Lambert, you know.
Yeah, that's a great conversation. I think you and I, Craig, a month or two ago talked about this meeting, saying it would be great to come out of it with something which might be, we all agree on some consistent policy. The first thing that comes into my head is how many plants can I grow?
I thought of that, Mike, and I thought we wouldn't be able to do that in 90 minutes.
Yeah. But we need to probably do that, I think.
Well, I think it's a conversation that's worth having. You know, it's something that you know, Brian brought up, and that is coordination between the states.
Yeah.
And I presume we're talking about between the state parties. I mean, yeah, that's something that, you know, I mean, we should talk about as a group, perhaps, you know, and how we can actually talk, you know, and have that sort of conversation.
My question is prompted not just by my inquiry regarding this, it's also the people in South Australia, the people in Tasmania who aren't here at the moment. This is the idea of a national group which is actually considering the legal variation across jurisdictions, model federal and state legislation, right, which has to be tailored to each jurisdiction so specifically, right? But these are all matters that are now within the reach of the movement. We've become large enough. There's enough legal minds in the movement at the moment, and I really would urge you guys to set up some formal liaison group and reach out. And me and a whole heap of other legal people will certainly jump on board, see it as, because it really is, as much as we talk in abstract terms a lot of this is very much a legal maze, right? There are so many straw man legal arguments constantly put up that need to be beaten down in short terms, and everyone really needs to be on the same page.
Could I also point out, though, that you know, locking yourself into into a specific framework sometimes you know, doesn't work. I mean, look at the Greens, for example, having, you know, I mean, I definitely don't agree with their federal model of having a monopoly, you know, the government, you know, as the wholesaler. You know, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Hell will freeze over before the government sells drugs in this country. It also sells cannabis.
I think the one thing that needs to be taken into account is just basic political reality.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
Peterson said, suddenly in order to get this amount up, we needed to cut something else. We can have grand
it's
plans.
Politics of possibilities.
Yeah, we can have grand plans for whatever, but ultimately all that we're going to get is what the ruling party allows. And so I think we should certainly do that. That's what we used to do as normal. We would come up with as much research on our own accord, tying everything together as we could, so that we were seen as proactive.
I think 2 years ago we could probably have started this conversation. What we have now is we're seeing the organic growth. We have now the first elected members of Parliament, and so we are actually engaged with creating a bill which will then be taken to the public. This is Sophia's bill, which will be taken to the public for the public to consult on. What does the public actually want? And that's a very important framework, because if we're going to legislate laws that the public doesn't want, then we're going to have to fight the public to maintain the law, much like fight the public to have cannabis laws. We need to actually have laws which reflect the public need and the public good. Now, so that's the first stage in Western Australia. But now we've got other states coming up for election. I expect we're going to have members of parliament in the other states who are from legalise cannabis. And that means that we can now work with other states to coordinate. So we need to actually improve how we, as different states, how we speak with each other. And I'd be encouraging for like a federal body, the legalised cannabis at a federal level, to be discussing how can we as a body, how can we as a nation move forward with sensible laws, because it's all very well having each individual state having its final laws, which is a mess. We need, with a federal approval for this. Why don't we have the one federal agreement and all the states agree with a unified approach there, so we're speaking with one voice.
In Australia, there's actually a proposition for model federal guidance legislation. We use it in health, we use it in a lot of situations where Section 52 doesn't actually provide the federal government with jurisdiction to take over that area, right? But then as the states have got together, they cede quite literally jurisdictional power to the federal government to a degree. Now that model legislation structure, right, has applied in a whole group of various areas of Australian law, and it would be my suggestion that it's best to follow the railroad tracks that we already have down. The reason that we use that model legislation, federal overriding umbrella form in Australia, is simply because of our constitutional makeup, right? And it's particular to Australia, right? And it's very simple to replicate that federal guidance, but it does require all of the states to get together and cede jurisdiction to a federal body. So it's a long-term project.
It's a long-term project, and this is why we need to actually work as individual state bodies with the federal body, that we can actually then begin to put in process that unified legislation which would give that. Now, unified legislation is actually, I don't know how the word is in other states, but that's what we use in WA, to get some kind of uniformity across the borders. But to do that, we need to start right where we are now, with one state, but now we need to work with the federal level, with our federal executive and the other states getting more and more members elected. And so that's a process. And so yes, I agree entirely, we need that communication, we need that conversation, we need it now, and I think today we're seeing this moving forward, that we're going to the next phase. We started with the kindergarten last year when we got elected in WA. Now we're going to move into the next phase of our education with the other states, and then we can look at the federal level. So yes, so we're on that path. Agree entirely with that. Communication, understanding, agreement. We'll work on that.
Michael, did you want to have a straw poll on the number of plants or something?
The question about the plants, that's a hot topic. I'm not sure if I want to go there because of many wrong answers can be given. But anyway, I do like the idea of a cannabis brain tank, what you're talking about, and it would be lovely if we had a national body who would represent that, who would have the science. I think that'd be great. How do you want to pay for it, is the question.
Well, I've never required payment for 30 years of active cannabis law reform. I don't think most of the people who are being engaged in this would be requiring public. Like, this is a public interest campaign. Yeah. Now, if it comes to the point where the various political parties do have the money to be able to pay drafters to specifically draft modern legislation for it, that's terrific, but that's well down the line.
Well, one of the problems that we do have in this country, though, is actually funding. So when you look in the US, like normal, it's a